I'm going to introduce Josh Russell from Bank of America. He's going to come up and he's going to actually introduce the plenary panel. I want to just say that Bank of America has been one of Prospect's longest standing sponsors, and they're committed to positive community action and leadership development. Their support has enabled us to reach out to high school and college students so they know about career opportunities in the clean tech market, and to leverage fellowship programs like the Encore program that supports experienced professionals transitioning into new community-focused careers, and Climate Corps, a program that supports recent university graduates with environmental degrees in finding their first jobs in sustainability. So please join me in welcoming Josh Russell.
My name's Josh. I'm part of Bank of America's Environment, Social, and Governance team, or ESG. So ESG is something that we integrate into all 8 of our lines of business, informing how we run our company, inclusive, supportive workplace we create for our employees, responsible products we offer our customers, and the impact we make around the world, helping local economies thrive, as well as our commitment to transition to a low-carbon economy. So just a little bit of context. Since 2013, Bank of America has deployed nearly $66 billion in financing to low-carbon sustainable businesses as part of our $125 billion environmental business initiative, and held our position as the lead green bond underwriter globally for the last 3 years. Locally, we support great organizations like Prospect Silicon Valley, and thanks for doing this. And we're also launching our first employee network in Silicon Valley called My Environment, which is focused on driving positive environmental change, helping our employees act as environmental stewards. And then lastly, we just announced that the city of San Jose was selected to participate in the Lead for Cities Grants program, which Bank of America is partnering with the U.S. Green Building Council to support. This new program consists of financial assistance, helping cities pursue Lead for Cities certification. So really excited about that. San Jose is one of 6 cities throughout the country that was selected to be a part of that. So now I know we're talking about smart cities, so I'll introduce some smart people and then get out of your way. All right, so John Eddy is the moderator. With experience that spans 30 plus years, John has engineered and managed master plan and final design projects ranging from multimodal transit stations, transit-oriented and mixed-use developments, to rail and road, bridges, and tunnels. John champions the importance of efficient design, gaining multiple economic, societal, and environmental benefits from a single element within a project. Next is George Karayanis, has over 25 years of emerging technology and sustainable solutions, leadership at Fortune 100 firms and high-tech startups. Mr. Karayanis currently leads Panasonic's City Now efforts in North America, focused on real estate developers. He serves on the City of San Jose's Smart City Advisory Board and has authored a book on the standard for most smart city indicators, among many other endeavors. He is also restoring a 100-year-old opera house to LEED Gold. Nicely done there. Patty Robb is the head of Intel's Silicon Valley Innovation Center, leading and advancing the industry in autonomous driving. She works on amazing projects and uses technology to improve people's lives every day. Patty is leading to close the technology industry gap and is a champion for the Pay It Forward program at Intel to help develop and advance more women at the company. Patty has 8 patents issued or pending, which is plus or minus 8 more than myself. So good job there, Patty. Casey Yamamoto is a deputy director at the Engineering and Program Delivery Division of Santa Clara VTA. Casey has over 25 years of experience on transportation solutions, ranging from the reliably old tech traffic signs and signals to emerging technologies of today. He's a member of the national panel studying the impact of transformational technologies on land use and transportation. He is a registered civil engineer in California and Alaska. And then finally, Mariko Davidson builds new mobility partnerships with cities for Ford Smart Mobility, where she's responsible for West Coast engagement. Prior to that, she built civic partnerships for Microsoft that leverage technology for the public good. For the past 13 years, she's worked with and for cities, specializing in governance, data policy, and mobility, where she served in the Boston Mayor's Office and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Welcome to the panel.
So thank you, Josh, very much for the introductions. And as you've heard, we have a really exciting panel that's playing in the entire footprint of cities. We have private development represented. We've got folks in the public right-of-way, We've got mobility that crosses between the public right-of-way and those private properties. And of course, all of this works in the collective ether of a city. So in a very significant way, you all have a role during this session, which is obviously to pay attention. But while we're up here opining, please formulate your questions. And please, if we don't answer them in this hour, we'd love for you to ask them towards the end of the hour and challenge the team up here of very smart people and challenge some of our thinking and advance that thinking. So if we're all ready, let's talk some smart cities. To the panelists, and we'll start with you, Mariko. Tell us about your focus in making cities smart.
Sure. Well, I come from a civic technology and government innovation background, and in my current role at Ford Smart Mobility, I'm focused on bringing new mobility partnerships and opportunities to cities. So Ford Smart Mobility is an LLC fully owned by Ford Motor Company, and we're the group that's charged with transforming the motor company into a mobility company. And what that means is we're building out a wide variety of services to create this mobility ecosystem. And that's really everything from the bike share that I think all of you have seen in San Jose and across the Bay Area, to data and digital services. We've invested in microtransit services with the recent acquisitions of Chariot and Transloc, and we're also investing in autonomous vehicles. So together we're creating this, as I said, mobility ecosystem. I'm an urban planner by training and come from a policy background, and previously worked with Microsoft building those civic technology and innovation partnerships.
Thanks, Mariko. Casey, what your organization, what are you doing in the smart city space?
Thank you. So when I thought about this question, it goes back to what Ruth started this symposium with. It's when we think about smart cities, we think about it in terms of quality of life. And so we're a public agency that works in many different spaces when it comes to the public sector. And so dealing with smart cities and dealing with smart cities concepts goes along with everything else that we're doing. We're a toll operator, we're a public transport agency, we do regional planning, we work with the local cities, and we have several different initiatives underway where we're looking at implementing technologies. So smart cities is all about quality of life, and some of the stuff that Alex talked about were some of the things that we talked about as a panel when we were preparing for this, looking at opportunities where we can use technologies to become more efficient, smarter. You know, I was also mentioning, I bounce these ideas off my 19-year-old and my 17-year-old at home. And that's a totally, I mean, they're, I guess, pre-millennial or something like that. And, you know, they look at me funny when I say, well, what do you think about smart cities? Because they read the headlines. And their ideas, their comments usually something like, well, aren't we already doing these things? Aren't we trying to get smarter? And so on and so forth. And so I think we're already doing the things that we should be doing. It's just sometimes it's hard to put a face and a name to exactly what smart city is. But from a VTA standpoint, we're in the public arena, and we're in different areas when it comes to smart cities.
Thanks, Casey. Patty, you and Intel.
Thank you. So I think from a company landscape, if people aren't familiar, obviously Intel has a wide variety of things that touch in the Internet of Things, right? We have our data center group, we have our 5G team, we have our Internet of Things team, and then also, if I talk about the business unit that I'm from, I lead the Silicon Valley Innovation Center for Autonomous Driving, and we've actually been in the automobile industry for over 10 years at Intel, and some of the ways you might have experienced us in the past are through your IVI or infotainment systems in the car. And we started focusing on the autonomous driving space several years back. And last year we acquired Mobileye, which really elevated our capabilities to start, saving lives today. It's really, our passion for safer transportation is really what drives us in our vision toward full autonomy every day. And as we acquired Mobileye, you may have experienced Mobileye. How many of you have ever driven in cars that have the lane keeping assist or forward collision warning capabilities in them, right? And one thing you may not know is that Mobileye cameras and ADAS systems are actually in 24 million vehicles that are on the road today. So we actually, the ADAS technology has been proven to reduce accidents by 30%. And we believe that these are, really important because they can actually help in making the city smarter today with all the cameras, as well as saving lives. So we like to think about it that ADAS can actually help kind of bring your system with you on the car or the vehicle or the city vehicles, and actually help to improve making the city smarter real time. And if you work on improving safety, you can actually get the data from the drivers to augment the sensors and cameras and cover blind spots, detect objects like pedestrians or other vehicles, and actually improve reaction time with emergency braking. So there's actually a company in Switzerland, an insurance company, AXA Switzerland, that says that actually giving simple early warning at least 1.5 seconds earlier could help prevent 90% of rear-end collisions. That's a pretty amazing statistic. And also reducing congestion in the city by lowering both the quantity and severity of crashes, which has a ripple effect and domino effect on the traffic every day. I know when I'm driving on the 101 or other places, I really would appreciate that lower rate of traffic. And I think getting more people to carpool, as well as he talked about in his carbon footprint, will also see an improvement there. And if you imagine saving 1.2 million lives, 1.25 million lives globally and annually, 157 hours of commute time, and 150 billion in fuel costs, it's really important to be working to deploy this technology even faster.
Thanks, Patty. And in fact, I got barked at by my ADAS system on the way down here in my Ford. I don't know how I do that. I got two of the companies up here that supply my joy. George, what's Panasonic and City Now up to in the smart city space?
Thank you, John, and thank you, Ruth, for hosting this, and thank you all for coming today. Panasonic has been focused on smart cities for about 15 years. We had a 45-acre manufacturing compound outside of Tokyo in a town called Fujisawa that was obsolete, and so we bladed it, and we partnered with about a dozen firms, and we created the world's first sustainable smart town from the ground up. Full build out at 2020, it'll have over 1,000 families living there. Over 650 families live there today. And when I say it's the world's most sustainable and resilient community, it's a 7-day microgrid. Every house has 3 days food and water, which obviously is getting managed. The community center doesn't have the mechanicals on the roof. The ground gently slopes up, and hundreds of residents can gather on the roof. The roof is above the flood line. Park benches convert to barbecue grills. Just very subtle but deeply integrated planning for sustainability and resiliency. City Now is the North American business unit that is charged with taking these dozen plus global smart city initiatives and building a business in North America. We're based in Denver, Colorado on a 400-acre transit-oriented development called Peña Station Next, which is a living lab for all of the stakeholders, which include the city and county of Denver, Denver International Airport, Xcel Energy, the land developer, and Panasonic. It really is it's on the new rail line from downtown to the airport. We're the last stop, so we're really the anchor for the growing Denver aerotropolis. And just a few transformational projects we've implemented in 2 short years. The states and Xcel's first safe and smart streetlights. The state's and Xcel's first microgrid, customer-tied microgrid. We have the country's first connected vehicle statewide deployment in a 5-year partnership with Colorado DOT. And in 2 months, we'll have the country's first autonomous electric vehicle operating on city streets, providing first mile, last mile transit between a rail stop and a bus stop.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you all. George, let's stick with you. Panasonic City Now is directed towards real estate developers. Smart buildings have been the rage for a long time. We've heard about that. Alex touched on zero, and some of our audience touched on zero energy and net zero in a lot of categories. what's going on right now where that's crossing from the building to the city space and from the city back to the building when it comes to smart?
Well, I found Alex's keynote both terrifying and highly motivating. So what I would say is we engage cities and states and utilities and real estate developers, and in every project, a different party will be the point, will lead, but invariably they're all required. And I would say what we've really found is essential is that we've got to get all of these stakeholders not just to the table, but to the same side of the table. You know, we are a broken record when we meet with new prospects and partners. It is all about stakeholder alignment, which then unlocks the public-private partnership business models, which then can lead to really cool projects. Smart City 1.0 kind of had that backwards. So what I would say in the built environment, what we're really helping these stakeholders, in particular developers with, is the business model, is with community resiliency, is with technology and with process on the business model side. Peña Station Next is a carbon neutral development. We are working with the utility and with National Renewable Energy Labs to create the country's first carbon neutral district energy plan, which essentially will, because of time, I'll just be very brief, will give the utility a business model forward in a net zero world so they can invest capital and steel in the ground, which makes the horizontal dirt more valuable, which makes the vertical square footage more valuable because the utility is offsetting some of the capex in that built environment. It's a win-win-win to get carbon neutral in a district. But the real impact to me is that cities, by solving the business model challenge, not the technology challenge, that's easy. By unlocking the business model, cities now have a path forward to deep decarbonization to hit their 2030 or 2050 climate action goals because of stakeholder alignment. On the community resiliency, developers are learning that it's not just the government and the utilities' responsibility to serve their citizens in an event of a prolonged power outage, service interruption. So we're helping them, again, through stakeholder alignment, do that. On the technology side, there's really cool building technology, but I will add on the process side, if you haven't seen it yet, the world's first 3D printed house has been made. It's in Austin. It is essentially using 3D printing to drive a concrete machine that is pouring the foundation. $10,000 for 650 feet, $6.50 a square foot built. That is insane.
That's crazy. Thanks, George. Patty, it's Intel Inside, right? You get your products are everywhere and in everything. You're now playing in the in-vehicle technology in a very, very big way, as you said. An autonomous technology program is very cool. What are a couple of the existing in-vehicle technologies that are or could be used to make cities smarter?
Sure, thanks. I think I talked a little bit about the ADAS technology and how that can be used, but I'll also talk a little bit about specifically for AVs, our REM technology, our Roadbook Experience Management. And basically this is a crowdsourced mapping technology, and it takes the experience, the memory of every Mobileye-equipped vehicle that drives a segment of road and compiles them into an accurate map. And these maps are crucial for automated driving, right? And the vehicles use them to localize their position and validate what the sensor system detects. And then basically this data from the map can be crowdsourced, right? It can handle two main challenges that you have in mapping. One is cost. It takes advantage of the existing vehicles and common routes. So instead of relying on a whole fleet of dedicated survey vehicles, you could use cars that you have out on the road today that are equipped with this. You could also use city vehicles. You could have garbage trucks, municipal trucks out gathering data with this technology today, even with the REM technology. And basically, it also solves a problem around time to update. So the AV needs the most recent data possible. And if an AV encounters new construction that hasn't made it to the map, it could fail to navigate that scenario on its own. Another interesting thing about the REM is it actually compresses down to about 10 kilobits per kilometer and it's easily communicatable on existing infrastructure today. So I think there's a lot of benefits to the REM technology, both now and into the future for AV technologies.
I'm glad you added that part about the data density, because that's always been a big fear of everybody, and it's amazing, an innovation that makes it possible and makes it useful. Casey, transportation is the first, I think it's where everybody starts when they think about smart cities. And in your role in transportation, in your role of getting things done and developing and building with VTA, what are some of the projects or initiatives that VTA has that'll make cities you serve smarter?
Thank you. So I'll start with a couple of specific initiatives and just talk about some things generally that we're doing. So, when our general manager, Nuria Fernandez, came to VTA, she did challenge us and embrace the idea of using technology at VTA. I think up to that point we had been kind of getting into the area, but since she's been at VTA, we've opened up an innovation center. We've implemented technologies related to the tolling facility that we operate here in Silicon Valley. We're a transit operator in that realm. We've pursued grants, and we have a couple of projects and pilots underway. One was Prospect Silicon Valley on a vehicle-to-grid integration project pilot that we're working on. As we're a public transit operator, we operate a 400 or 500 vehicle fleet of vehicles. And as Mayor Liccardo mentioned, we have dipped our toe into electric vehicle arena and have taken delivery on our first 5 electric buses and have ordered for more, and eventually full electrification of our entire fleet. And the other side of the realm, in terms of being a public agency, we need to be able to respond to and be able to work with all manner of customers and the public out there. So we have a pilot project we're trying to get started working with the VA hospital in Palo Alto, where we'd be operating autonomous shuttles to basically bridge the last mile from that site to VTA bus stops or other facilities that are nearby. And so that's a fairly promising endeavor. One of the things that's going to help us have a dialogue on is there was a NCHRP study that completed recently where they looked at policy implications for all manners of the transportation sector and even other arenas outside of transportation, and the link between AV and those sectors. And when you talk, and I attended one of the sessions talking about public transportation, and I think about 2/3 of the discussion had to do with workforce and how a public agency like VTA will be migrating our workforce. The union represented employees that we have a little over 2,000 employees, and we have operators and mechanics that make up the largest union group. And so those sort of discussions haven't really started in great detail, but those are the things that we're going to have to deal with as a public agency. One other thing I'd like to mention is in my introduction, it was mentioned NCHRP 8-117 is just getting started to look at the impacts of these transformational technologies, and things like 3D printing that George mentioned have come up in our discussions. Because when we went into it, the panel was thinking AV, connected vehicles, and then the AASHTO folks that were kind of, and the NCHRP panel heading up the study said, no, we want to look at everything. We want to look at any sort of emerging technology and how that could impact land use and transportation. So this is something that'll probably wrap up sometime middle of next year. It's just getting started. And so one of the things I want to put out a plug is we're looking for experts to serve on a panel. There's limited budget, but we're going to be meeting in Irvine in August. So if you're interested, you want to give me your business card, I can put in a plug for you.
Business opportunities coming your way from this panel. Mariko, you are with Ford, you've been with Microsoft, and your role has been to partner with cities over the years. And cities, Mayor Liccardo and the city family down here in San Jose have an amazingly broad mandate that compromises imperatives that for most of us are pretty daunting: health and environment, education, economy, access to everything, all the above, equity, safety, resilience. Companies offering to help with these imperatives, it seems like they should be able to kick a lot of doors open at City Hall. Which imperatives is Ford helping with?
Sure. So Ford is all about access and believes mobility is one of the key drivers of freedom and access. And from an urban planning and policy perspective, mobility is one of those drivers for access to opportunity. And what I mean by that is how you get to your job, how you get to your hospital, school, childcare, that all matters. And you put that all together, and your housing, and you put that all together, and that creates this special algorithm around access to opportunity. And mobility is one of the key pieces of that access. At Ford, what we're doing is we have a wide variety of pilots and initiatives that we're working on. Some of them are working directly with cities and mass transit systems to support them on first and last mile gaps. And more recently, we've also rolled out something called Go Ride, which is a non-emergency medical transportation services that supports people getting from their home to their hospital. These are vehicles that are equipped with for wheelchairs, but also for hospital beds with oxygen tanks. And you can imagine that allows people to get to their places of care more easily.
That's very cool. Very cool. What imperatives is Intel helping out with along the same lines as Mariko's answer?
I think one thing I can talk about is we're working with Spain to drive adoption and expansion of existing technology with ADAS, right? So we're using it to collect actionable data. We're also collecting actionable data, defining a regulatory roadmap to position well the opportunities that we face in safety and mobility. And for Barcelona, the city council has installed the Mobileye collision avoidance system into buses and other vehicles around the city to increase road safety. And in doing so, it saw they had a control group in the actual project, and it saw that buses equipped with the systems experience had 71% fewer collision warnings per 1,000 miles, and 43% fewer pedestrian and cyclist collisions, and 58.5% potential reduction in vehicle and pedestrian claims. So already seeing a very impactful study there in Spain, and we're working with other cities as well.
Wow, that's cool. George, property developers, city imperatives don't always seem to be in the same sentence, but knowing what Panasonic City now is up to, there's probably a lot you guys are doing. What are you doing?
Well, in particular, we're helping developers and communities achieve much greater density, housing density. We call it workforce housing. You know, affordable housing kind of has a negative connotation, but if you're a city worker, if you're a teacher, if you're 25 and just getting started, how do you afford your first house? In Denver, where we're based, average home price, just top 500,000. It's even more than that here in the Bay Area. And so densification, which we think of as small space living, being a Japanese company, we're very familiar. Got 100 years experience in small space living and transit-oriented developments. And so it's really about cubic feet, the quality of the cubic foot space, not the square foot space. And in addition, I would say what I touched on earlier is community resiliency. How can we help developers create communities that can withstand several days or longer of service outage? And many times, historically, I talked about getting stakeholder alignment. Historically, the developer, the city, and the utility have these arm's length relationships, and that's worked fine for business as usual. But that's not what we need going forward. And so a developer might say, well, I don't want to pay for a battery. I can't afford PV. Why do I want to do it? Well, if you don't own it, then it's not on your balance sheet, and yet it's still part of this integrated equation. And so we find, again, the most impactful solutions are coming from getting all of those stakeholders on the same side of the table, in particular around community resiliency. and a layered form of that, not just a big battery for mission critical applications, but possibly in-unit residential energy storage appliances that would show up via FedEx. You plug it into your circuit, it backs up anything on that circuit. The utility may own it, and they would control it 99.9% of the time, and that 0.1% of the time when you need it, it's there for you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we hear a lot about smart cities. We're in a smart cities session here, what they promise, what their potential is. And there are some good things going on. You heard it from the mayor this morning, and you've heard it from our panelists. But smart cities, let's face it, it doesn't feel to be moving at a pace that a lot of the other sectors are when it comes to getting smarter. And I think that's a better term, by the way, for smart cities. They're incredibly smart. They're just getting smarter. In your experience, in the experience of your organizations, what's impeding the smart city development from your perspective, and what could be some of the potential accelerators? And Casey, let's start with you.
That's a very good question, and that's something I would challenge all of you throughout the rest of today to think about as you listen to the other presenters, because even at VTA, we're trying to figure this out too. And Gary Miskell, who's our chief information officer, is in the audience here. How many projects have we kind of dabbled into? Something like 30, 40 different pilots. I mean, since Nuria arrived at VTA, we pretty much have a shingle out that says we're open for business. All of you are welcome to come reach out to us, and if you have ideas on things that you would want to test or pilot, Gary's the person to reach out to because he's had that experience. But related to that, one of the challenges is contracting. So private sector moves at light speed, and government bureaucracies may be a little bit slower. And so trying to get those mesh up in our processes has been a little bit of a challenge. We've developed some templates for contracting and so on. I think we're all ears on what other people are doing. So if you obviously work with other public entities, you have some ideas on how to improve what we're doing, we're open to listen to that as well. So that's one of the issues. And then lastly, it always comes down to funding. So we have pots of funding with different strings attached, whether it comes from the Federal Transit Administration or Federal Highway Administration or the state or local funds. And so it's always been a challenge to navigate that. So we have some efforts to try to help with that. Some of those things aren't totally unstuck yet, but we're working on trying to figure out how we could better fund what we're doing as well.
Thanks, Casey. Patty, from Intel's perspective, how do we grease the skids?
In looking at this today, I think San Jose's smart city vision, first and foremost, the goal is safe city, and specifically targeting data analytics and other prevention efforts to reduce traffic collisions and fatalities. And that's exactly why we think that ADAS plays a role for both smart cities and for automated driving. And I think one of the keys is also around, the technology, certainly, right, for successful strategy and automation, big data, and the Internet of Things that augment things. But I think cities are also going to move at their own pace, so it's less of a bright line. And I think you'll also see that we need some banding together around some common policies, right? So I think one of the things that we would look at is, at Intel and Mobileye, is that we're backing this responsibility, sensitive safety. So if you think about it, RSS is a mathematical model that formalizes human notions of safe driving, right? So, but they're simple things. If you break it down inside of the mathematical model and you think about this, it's we've taken data from NHTSA crashes, and we were able to classify those and basically able to put them into categories. And if you formalize it, you say, what are the basic things that drive RSS? One is keep a safe distance from the car in front of you, allow ample time and space for cars while merging and changing lanes, and understand that right-of-way is given, not taken, right? And so I think working together to be able to formalize a safety model for autonomous driving, cities, business, government, federal government in addition to cities, and basically coming up with a common policy. These are some of the things that are also going to drive how we get to a smart city faster. And so the smartest cities will be those that build and contribute to consortiums like RSS, and we would actually welcome it to have other people join. And this will help to accelerate the fastest.
Thanks, Patty. George, from Panasonic's perspective.
So what will really accelerate the implementation is two things. First, stakeholder alignment. I said it before, I'm going to keep saying it. It really is about getting everyone to the same side of the table. Smart City 1.0, if there is such a thing, was about shiny objects. It's not about shiny objects. It's about, in fact, if you ask everybody in here, I guarantee you, there would be no two answers the same as to what is a smart city. So our definition of a smart city is whatever that region's senior executive stakeholders collectively define. And it's not just the city stakeholders, it's the regional stakeholders, transit agencies, utilities, et cetera. By getting those stakeholders aligned, that's what unlocks the public-private partnership business models. And so the truly mind-blowing stuff we've done at Peña Station and around the world isn't Panasonic doing cool stuff. In fact, I call what we're doing in Denver and Peña Station Next seven-legged racing, because we only move forward together. And if you've ever been tied to the hip to a utility and a city, oh my God, it's painful. But we're not going to stop, right? We're not going to move as fast as a private company can, but we're going to move a hell of a lot faster than anybody thought we collectively would. And so it's, the secret is not shiny stuff. It's very prosaic. It is about stakeholder alignment.
Thanks, George. And Mariko, from Ford's perspective.
Couldn't agree more with what George just talked about, stakeholder engagement. One of the biggest challenges that I see is really a focus on the technology and not necessarily a focus on the community and the people. We have the technology ready, but ultimately it comes down to the people, the governance structures, the regional, municipal, state, federal level governance, the stakeholder engagement, as George said, and Alex, Stefan alluded to as well in his talk. So I think it really ultimately comes down to consensus building, figuring out our governance practices, and finding new ways to collaborate.
Thanks, Mariko. Now, we didn't practice this next question, so if they both have if somebody answers the same way as somebody else, then we're all really cool. I'm fortunate to work with for Arup, and I hear about cool things all the time. And I know that these organizations are absolutely the same in that they hear about amazing things all the time. So I've asked the panel, and I'll ask the panel, to provide you, the audience, and me, with the I hadn't thought of that moment today in the panel session. An insight or two in the realm of smart cities that's a cool find through research data, design, analytics, et cetera. So Patty, I hadn't thought of that.
I think one thing that people...
Turn your mic. Yeah.
One thing that people may not know, I think you think about it, seat belts, airbags, anti-lock brakes, a lot of these features took time to get into cars, actually decades, right? And you think about it, you have to wait for a new model to come out and replace cars. Sometimes disruption comes from how what is a new technology, and sometimes also disruption comes from how you deploy that new technology and what the market is. So I think one of the really interesting things is that a lot of the Mobileye ADAS systems that we have can actually retrofit existing vehicles today, as well as the REM camera technology. So being able to take and deploy more cameras on cars today, deploy the ADAS systems to retrofit existing vehicles. And that's one of the many reasons that we were so excited at Intel to integrate Mobileye aftermarket products that can accelerate the adoption curve of saving lives, right? And if you also look at it this way, you can provide the REM mapping capabilities to cars that are already on the road, and we're not limited to the rate at which new cars replace old ones, because you can actually install these on retrofit and basically save lives today, and also take these learnings and prepare for autonomous driving that's coming very soon as well.
Yeah, the first barrier everybody talks about with autonomous vehicles is how fast is the fleet going to turn over. The first barrier to an efficient built environment is how fast can we either retrofit or replace the building stock to be more efficient. But you've nailed it. I mean, the vehicles today can be retrofitted to be incredibly more informative and much safer. Great. George.
Well, so like many of you, I'm a tech geek. I assume many of you are tech geeks. We're in Silicon Valley, and I'm a smart city geek. So when I went to visit Fujisawa in Japan, outside of Tokyo, I was expecting this technology religious experience, right? And I get there, and my aha moment was how utterly normal the community was. It was tech was everywhere, but the magic was that it was nowhere. And these homes, they're $500,000 for 1,000 square feet. They're worth 25% more than the homes, same size home across the street. So my aha moment was that it ain't about the tech. It's about human-centric design.
Great, great. Mariko.
Cool stuff. So one of the projects that we're working on is an autonomous vehicle launch in Miami. And it's a partnership with Postmates and Domino's Pizza all around goods delivery and how customers will interface in the last 50 feet of their home or their workplace to pick up their Domino's or Postmates delivery. The delivery is in a vehicle, you can punch in a code and a window will roll down and you can pick up your pizza there. And right now this is a research pilot really to understand how that customer interfaces. And I think one of the interesting moments is thinking about how land use will impact the customer experience. You know, if you're in a single family home, will you be more likely to come out and get your pizza versus a denser area in Miami? Time will tell. We'll see what the research says, but I think that's an interesting component.
That's gonna be good to watch and keep an eye on. Casey, from a BTA's perspective.
Yeah, I'll kind of touch on what Mariko said related to land use. And it's not exactly an aha moment, but just kind of like a building aha moment a little bit. Where our office is located in North San Jose, if you went there a few years ago, you would see our R&D campus, which I think was probably owned by some R&D company before we purchased it, 3 buildings. Across the street is a Canon building, and across the street was an AT&T building, and on the other side is a Hynix building. No housing, no shops, nothing. We didn't, have to drive to go to different places to go for lunch and so on. But now if you go back there, you see housing everywhere. And so even though, we still have a long ways to go, I think there's going to be a metamorphosis in what Silicon Valley looks like in the next few years. And that's happening with things like Google planting, major investment in downtown San Jose, everything that's going on up in Mountain View and Bayshore, North Bayshore area, Moffett Park area in Sunnyvale, even in Milpitas and obviously Apple and Cupertino. So in terms of how that's going to impact transportation, I think I think we're at a cusp where we need to rethink how things are going to be connected in terms of transportation and how we, meaning the public agencies, would be connecting with the private sector, whether it's Ford or other folks that are getting into the mobility space. So I think that's a big major takeaway in the last few months that's starting to that we're all starting to talk about.
That's going to be a big change. So I'm going to take a moment to share my aha moment, I hope, for you. I'm the longest running person on the Transbay Transit Center in San Francisco. I started that project in 1999. It's about to open in August, so you can congratulate me afterwards. We're still working on it as a firm. That facility has a minimum of 9 public transit agencies that are going to be serving it, including when high-speed rail arrives in San Francisco. Not only did we not provide a single parking space in the project, we took away 4,000. And that was decided in 2001. And here we are, and I hope we get it right but I just want you to ponder that for a second, that we did not provide. We took away 4,000 parking spaces. And I think that will become an aha moment because that land will be utilized in a much more productive and long-term way as a result. So with that, I'm not going to thank these guys yet because they're not done. This is when we open it up for a bit of audience interaction. So if you have any questions at all of the group, please fire away, wait for the microphone to arrive in your lap, and fire away if you have questions. Got one mid-top. There you go.
Yes, we've. Hello? Yeah. We've all had vast experience with software in our lives, and it works remarkably well, but never 100% perfect. And to think that it was going to work 100% perfect is just not, is ludicrous. We know that's not reality-based, but that's the expectation for autonomous vehicles. If we expect them now to work perfectly, and if something happens, somebody gets injured or killed, things shut down. So that's ridiculous. And so I think we need a group of people to come together and maybe in a group and act sort of like the little kid in the Emperor's New Clothes and state the obvious, that these things will be deployed and they will injure people and kill people because things don't work perfectly 100% of the time. And I know that companies in the business have thought about how to craft that message, which is obvious. So can anybody speak to that, about maybe that breakthrough could happen collectively rather than a company risking that message individually?
So I think if I paraphrase your question, you are asking if there's going to be a common protocol for not losing the computer, not losing the software.
Well, how companies would, I think it's an obvious point, I'm not the first one to think of it, and I wonder if companies are speaking to that, how they might speak to that message or craft that.
Well, I'll craft it a slightly different way. We've got millions of miles of autonomous driving already, and so there's got to be some success in there somewhere. But how have you, does anybody want to pick that up and comment on how the technologies, the reliability of the technology is being addressed?
I heard two things in there, so I'm going to focus on some of the things that we are doing, and I think it's really bringing people together in a proactive way about, you know, the responsibility-sensitive safety, right? And really formalizing the human notions of driving and defining common safety approach between all of the different groups, right? Between policymakers, advocacy groups, companies, industry, and other stakeholders, to create a transparent standard for safety that would basically exist outside of any particular brand of technology, right? And I think this is the thing that will help us to get to the vision of where we need to be.
George?
And what I would add is that, you know, the high-speed single occupancy vehicle crashes that are getting a lion's share of attention in the media, the low-speed shuttles in particular, 100% safety rating. And, you know, the Google engineer who unfortunately passed away 2 months ago or so, right here in the Bay Area, you know, he's a pioneer. And 100 people, roughly 100 people died that day in America that got no coverage other than that local newspaper. And so it's coming. It won't be perfect. It will be a hell of a lot better than what the 40,000 people dying on the roadways today is.
And I could say that Ford is really focusing on their autonomous vehicle launch in 2021, which is several years away, because there's a focus on safety and research first.
Next question.
Thank you.
I
wanted
the-
to follow
hello?
on a
She's got the microphone up there.
Got the microphone. John, I was fascinated by your final comment, and curious about the Trans-Bay Terminal taking away the parking. I think I'm delighted to hear that, and I think that works terrifically in an urban environment like the city. Unfortunately, in the suburbs, there are a lot of city councils, for instance, Burlingame as an example, just voted to create a huge new parking structure downtown, just despite protests to the contrary. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about that in the suburban environment.
It is more of a challenge in a suburban environment, and I drive to BART every day. You know, I have my parking pass at the BART station, and I drive there every day that I'm in the city to go into San Francisco. And there's no doubt that the parking is going to be a necessity in the low densities, because it's so hard for organizations like the VTA to efficiently provide responses to people's demands for in all the various neighborhoods and densities to get to those stations. I think the next trick, though, is going to be paying attention to what's peak parking. Are we nearly there? We probably are very nearly there. And then what do we need afterwards, after peak parking? And if every BART station turns into an autonomous drop-off point, the curb frontage isn't going to work. The access for the people and the number of vehicles that are come in and go isn't going to work. But the parking is providing the reservation of space to create that scenario where you have more of an airport-type drop-off. And so we are actually doing a lot of work around parking because all of our clients, whether they're public sector or private, are all wondering, am I building too much? Have I built enough? And what we're finding is, in fact, if you place the parking correctly and size it right and position it correctly, an awful lot of parking will get built and be repurposed for a vehicle in the future, rather than built and then have to be repurposed for human occupancy of a built program. It's a much easier thing to transition to going from a vehicle use to a vehicle use. So don't panic. You're not probably doing anything wrong, but you do have to look at your parking differently. We've got.
Thank you. This is a question following on a comment that George made about governance, including stakeholder participation. But governance and how governance and governments interact with opportunity is kind of a very critical accelerator. I'd be interested in each of the panelists' experience, and if they could share maybe their top 3 characteristics based on your experience about what are good governance characteristics that lead to innovation.
Who wants to start?
I'll start and we'll go to the right, I guess. It's not a governance process perspective, but what I would say is what's really essential is clear leadership that is strong and broadly bought into, broadly supported, because the governance will come if the vision is clear and broadly supported. And, these large P3 opportunities, right? These are large, complex organizations, cities, utilities, large real estate developers. Each of them independently is very complex. And then trying to get them moving in a set direction together is extremely difficult. And it's only possible if the senior executives are deeply committed to it, because they will drift. Each of those organizations will drift. So the governance will come from clear leadership that is broadly supported.
Yeah, so I was just going to add on, I agree with what George said, and the second thing I'd like to bring up is a win-win. So if it's private, public, public, private, private, if all parties that are involved are on the table with the same vision, and there's a win in terms of what you're moving towards, I think that's really important.
Some of the successes that I've seen have come from organizations within government that are enabled to take risk. Mayor Liccardo talked about how government is not equipped to take risk, and sometimes you find these offices of innovation or other pockets in government that have been given the political cover and the leadership capital to take on risk. And when they do that, when they're empowered in that way, then they have the capacity to make some of these public-private partnerships. If they show a success and a win, then that only helps to scale it out in the future.
To build on that, I think additionally the pilots, right, where cities come together and say, we'd like to partner with industry. Here's the things we bring to the table. We don't know about this space. Can you help us, right? And we kind of bring together different viewpoints in the industry who are best in practice, at areas as well as with the city to work together on solving problems and challenges. I've seen this be very successful as well.
Thanks, panel. Next question. Yes, sir.
Hi, Thomas Lee. Thank you all for coming today. It's a very interesting panel. A comment about, or a thought about some of the comments regarding deployment and safety, particularly I think when it comes to transportation technologies and AVs. Are there lessons that we can learn from the healthcare industry where, right, with pharma or with medical devices, you go through this very well thought out, deliberate process of scaling up your technology and testing it before you're even allowed to market it, right? So you go through animal trials, you go through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Are there efforts in the transportation sector to do something like that so that you have actually a well-defined pathway for deploying these new technologies?
That's a pretty rich question. Do any of the panelists want to grab it? Or are we going to take the fifth?
I think in general, right, I talked about, again, I'm just going to go back to the responsibility sensitive safety for one moment, and then I'll talk a little bit about what you brought up is just getting people to partner on how is it that we have a common standard and definition, right? What is it that we're driving toward in terms of safety? And then it transcends technology, because then if you have data, you can use that data to learn across different companies, and ultimately I think this helps to make things safer. The other thing I'll say is that the state of California has one of the strongest regulations in the nation, right? In terms of what are you doing in terms of training your drivers? What are you doing in terms of testing your vehicle? What are you doing before you in terms of simulation, or what are you doing before you're putting the vehicles on the road? I actually feel, if I've looked across the different states, and I have, that California is a role model and example for how things can be done across words. And we're also working directly with the federal government as well to make sure we get in place a federal support on things in terms of how we're approaching this, because right now you have to go kind of state by state, right? You shouldn't have to go and approach each state in terms of what your regulations are, and there's already a framework through existing driving technology or driver's licenses and things like this to be able to roll out a framework. But at Intel, we're committed to making AV technology safe. We're already doing so with ADAS, with 24 million vehicles on the road, and we've got even more customers that are deploying this technology. This year there'll be an additional 2 million vehicles on the road. BMW, Nissan, and VW have all publicly agreed to source data for the project, for our REM project, and really what drives us every day is about creating safe technology.
Casey, you want to?
Yeah, I want to say something really quickly. So, not going to directly respond to your question, but as a public agency, safety is our most important criteria. So, when we're implementing technologies, we're looking for things to enhance the safe systems that we're already operating.
And I would add, the market is moving far too fast for centralized control. Right. Remember, we're trying to reduce almost 40,000 deaths a year.
Go ahead. Just remember, too, Secretary Fox, the former transportation secretary under the Obama administration, his criteria for a successful deployment of autonomous vehicles is a 50% reduction in fatalities. And his message out to the world was, we don't need perfect, we just need a heck of a lot better. What question?
Yeah, good morning. This is a good panel. Thank you. Raj from Duke Energy out of Charlotte. So we actually work with this in a smart city initiative with the city of Charlotte, and one way that we are partnering with them is to install, for example, cameras on the dump trucks, and then inspect the roads so that we can identify the potholes, and then aggregate all of that, and then allocate the funds to where we need to go. So that seems to me a good example of leveraging the data and then making the city more efficient and then bring the, bring the benefit back to the taxpayers. So I want to hear from the panelists some of the use cases like that where we are not only leveraging, we are not only trying to make it efficient, but also trying to bring the operations management to and then bring the money back to taxpayers by putting this vision on it. So I want to hear some thoughts on things like that.
I'm going to ask the panel to, we're only going to do one more question after this, so audience, prepare yourself. Does anybody have anything, an example they want to provide?
One of the companies part of Ford Smart Mobility is Chariot. Chariot is a microtransit, a turnkey microtransit service based in San Francisco. And one of the things that they are doing with the SF MTA is regularly sharing their data, which is a differentiator that is not always common in this field. So they are sharing their data around usage and routing and continuing to collaborate with the SFMTA. And we hope that that will ultimately make transit services better in San Francisco.
My one example is we're a toll operator. We operate the 237 express lanes. And since we've been in operation, we've returned revenues that are 172% of what our operating costs have been. And that's been driven by our management wanting to run that enterprise as a business. And so we're basically accruing net revenues that would go back into transit and some of our other operations at BTA.
My quick example is that in a small city in the East Bay, they are struggling with traffic, and they had traffic analyses done, and they had an assumption of where the source of that traffic was coming from. When we were able to get some anonymized data about people's actual origin and destination, we found out that it actually wasn't coming from the place that they thought it was, and the origin and destinations changed the entire approach to how to solve the traffic problem. So we could have invested a lot of money in the old school way of determining that, and because we used a new school way, we invested the money properly. Last question.
Actually, I have a comment and a question. The comment is that from what I know, there is a difference between the ADAS technologies and the autonomous vehicle technologies. So the ADAS technologies, they use sensors to reduce accidents on human-driven vehicles, and the autonomous vehicles are fully not human-driven. So my question is that, do you think it makes sense for smart cities to monitor the movement of autonomous vehicles and to get data to see whether it is causing accidents or what type of accidents it's causing or what kind of reliability and safety record these things have?
So one comment I'll make, you're right, the ADAS is a predecessor, but if you think about it, in order to deploy autonomous vehicles, each of the things that you're doing with an ADAS vehicle are needed, right? You need to be able to stay in your lane. You need to be able to detect when other cars are around you. There's each of these things, if you think about it, rather than thinking of them as different, we like to think of it that it's a building block, and each of these are building blocks on the way to autonomous driving versus being completely separate. And I'll just say, I brought up the Barcelona example. We are deploying the cameras with other cities as well, and on vehicles, and using this to learn from, right, in terms of where are there hot spots where there may have been accidents that occurred, or where are there hot spots where there was traffic and congestion, and using this data to learn to help improve roads, improve performance and things like this. And I don't think cities necessarily need to monitor all autonomous vehicles, but I think there's an exchange of data that can happen to make the city smarter and more efficient.
Thank you, Patty. I do have to bring it to the session to a close. Your panel has been, the panel that's been talking to you has just been fantastic. George Karianis from Panasonic, thank you very much. Patty Robb, Intel, thank you so much. Casey Emoto from BTA, much appreciated. And Mariko Davidson from Ford's Smart Mobility Program. And to you, thank you for asking really good questions and keeping everybody on their toes. Thank you very much.